What if I told you that Native Americans could stay dry for weeks while living under constant rain without synthetics or waterproof membranes? You can't even imagine how amazing the ingenuity of peoples who lived in harmony with nature, using only its resources was. Their methods of protection from moisture without modern technology may seem like a miracle to us, but it was just applied science, honed over millennia. Watch the video to the end and you'll learn how fat, smoke, and bark became more reliable than any modern raincoat, allowing hunters of the Great Plains and fishermen of the eastern forests to withstand the elements themselves. Are you ready for the shocking truth about ancient waterproofing technology? For hunters of the Great Plains, such as the Lakota and Cheyenne, leather clothing was a key element of survival, and its water-repellent properties were no accident. They knew very well that simply dried leather, whether deer, elk, or bison, would get wet, become heavy, and harden as it dried. That is why they perfected a process of impregnation and tanning that transformed the hide into a flexible and nearly waterproof material. The secret lay in fat, animal fat from bison or moose. After careful tanning, when the leather became soft and elastic, it was repeatedly rubbed with melted fat mixed with animal brain matter. This natural fat penetrated deep into the fibers of the leather, enveloping them and displacing water. The result was clothing that not only repelled water, but also retained its softness and flexibility even after getting wet. This fat barrier prevented moisture from penetrating the material, causing raindrops to simply roll off the surface, just like modern polyethylene. The process was laborious and required constant repetition, but its effect was remarkable in its reliability and durability.
Make sure you get the edges well.
It's absorbing beautifully.
Look at that finish.
Warriors who went on long campaigns during the rainy season or winter blizzards spent hours carefully treating their moccasins and outer garments. Moccasins treated with fat were able to withstand long journeys on wet ground, keeping feet dry, which was critical for preventing frostbite. This technology was one of the most important for survival in harsh climates, especially in the Great Plains, where shelter was not always available. Sometimes more complex mixtures were used for impregnation, adding crushed plants or natural dyes. These additives not only improved the appearance, but sometimes increased water resistance or repelled insects. But the basis always remained the same: animal fat, which gave life and protection.
Keep rubbing it in well.
The red pigment is taking nicely.
It will be strong now, and keep the water out.
This method was so effective that it was also used to protect other important items, such as food bags, bow covers, and quivers. Keeping food supplies and weapons dry was just as important as staying dry yourself. This method, combining hard work and knowledge of the properties of fat, proves that the most reliable solutions are often right there on the surface, if you look closely at nature. Tanning and impregnating leather was a daily and important activity that ensured the safety of the entire tribe.
Keep scraping until it's smooth.
This hide will keep the rain out for sure.
Do you think this ancient method of fat impregnation can be considered more environmentally friendly and reliable than modern water-repellent sprays? We are very interested to hear your opinion. What do you think about this approach to moisture protection? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on other amazing secrets of indigenous peoples. I discovered this by accident while studying the way of life of the Iroquois. Are you ready to learn how simple tree bark could replace a modern raincoat and be completely free? In the eastern forests, where peoples such as the Iroquois lived, rain was a common occurrence, and they needed completely different protection than the inhabitants of the arid plains. The humid climate and dense forests, rich in deciduous trees, provided them with a unique, lightweight, and highly effective material for making clothing: tree bark. The Iroquois used the bark of trees such as elm and cedar to create not only the walls of their famous longhouses, but also their personal raincoats. The secret was to remove the bark from the tree in one large piece, taking care not to damage its structure. The inner layer of the bark has a natural density and fiber content. After removal, the bark was treated to make it more flexible without compromising its water-repellent properties. It could be slightly softened and then carefully sewn together to form a simple but effective raincoat. The result was a kind of natural armor that completely covered the shoulders and upper body. Cedar bark was especially valued because it not only provided reliable protection from rain, but also had a pleasant, lasting scent that repelled certain insects. Cedar bark was easily split into long, strong fibers that could be woven together to create a dense, almost woven fabric. This weave was very flexible and durable, allowing the cloak to be worn without fear of tearing. Unlike heavy impregnated leather, a bark cloak was very light, which was a huge advantage during long journeys through dense forests. It allowed the hunter to move silently and quickly without overheating. The bark acted as an ideal natural barrier, preventing moisture from penetrating the clothing. Such cloaks were used primarily to protect against sudden downpours or prolonged drizzle. They could be quickly removed and dried, and if damaged, replaced, as the material was always at hand. It was the perfect solution for a forest lifestyle, where not only durability but also accessibility of the material was important. In addition to raincoats, bark was used to make large awnings and shelters that could be quickly built in the forest. Pieces of bark stretched between trees created the perfect dry camp, protecting against rain and dew. The longhouses of the Iroquois themselves, being covered with bark, remained dry inside regardless of the weather. These simple but ingenious methods show how the indigenous peoples of the eastern forests used the gifts of their environment. They did not fight nature, but adapted its resources to their needs, creating effective and reliable tools. Bark became a symbol of their adaptation to the humid climate. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Apache turned stones and dust into their main weapon of invisibility. You've definitely never heard of this unique secret. If protection from rain was the first line of defense, then combating internal humidity was no less important for health and comfort.
The smoke from these herbs and the warmth of the fire absorb the moisture in the air. This keeps us healthy.
The fire and herbs dry the air.
In many Native American dwellings, from Lakota teepees to Iroquois longhouses, smoke was the primary means of drying clothes, skins, and the dwelling itself. The use of smoke was not limited to simple heating. Smoke, or more precisely the smoking process, had a unique effect on materials. Skins and leather clothing, when constantly exposed to smoke, became more resistant to water. The smoke from the fire penetrated the fibers, further compacting and changing their structure, reducing their hygroscopicity. This process was especially important for drying and smoking bison hides, which were used to cover teepees. After the hides were tanned and sewn, they were placed over a smoldering fire inside the teepee. The smoke rose upward, evenly saturating the inner surface of the hides. This process not only made the material stronger, but also protected it from rot and mold. In addition, smoke was necessary for quickly drying wet clothes. After a long journey in the rain, hunters hung wet shirts, moccasins, and blankets inside their dwellings, directly above the hearth. The heat and smoke quickly drew out the moisture, preventing the clothes from rotting or spoiling. It was the perfect drying cabinet system in the field. In long houses, where many families lived, the central hearths were arranged in a row, and the smoke escaped through openings in the roof. The constant presence of smoke helped to maintain low humidity levels throughout the house. This was especially critical during the cold season, when high humidity led to rapid cooling.
And the Great Bear traveled all the way across the frozen lake.
Did he find the berries, Father?
Not until spring arrived.
We should not forget about odor control. Smoked clothing did not have the unpleasant smell of damp leather that quickly appears in wet environments. Smoke not only dried, but also disinfected, preventing the growth of bacteria and fungi. Thus, smoke was not just a product of combustion, but a multifunctional tool, a preservative, a dryer, a protective barrier, and even a means of hygiene. This method shows how deeply indigenous peoples understood the physical and chemical processes taking place around them and knew how to use them. Like this video if you think such ancient ingenuity deserves respect. What you are about to learn will change your perception of Wild West dwellings. Not only did clothing require protection from moisture, but the dwelling itself had to be dry and warm. For peoples living in regions with harsh winters and frequent precipitation, such as the Cree or Athabascans in the subarctic, and even the tribes of the Great Plains, insulation was the key to comfort. To achieve this, they used readily available natural materials. The construction of dwellings such as teepees was designed to provide excellent drainage and insulation. The leather covering of the teepee was attached to the frame so that the bottom edge did not touch the ground. This allowed moisture running down the skins to drain into the soil without pooling at the base. The exterior walls were often covered with additional layers of dry grass, pine branches, or animal skins to create an extra barrier against heat and moisture. Dry grass and branches contain a lot of air, which makes them excellent insulators, preventing cold and dampness from penetrating inside. The floors inside the dwellings were not left bare either. They were covered with thick layers of dry spruce or cedar branches, and bison skins were laid on top with the fur facing up. This multi-layered floor created a barrier between the cold and often damp ground and the living space. As a result, even after heavy rain, the inside of a teepee or other dwelling remained relatively dry. Special attention was paid to ventilation. An opening was always left at the top of the teepee to allow smoke and steam to escape, which helped regulate humidity. The smoke carried away excess moisture, preventing condensation on the inside of the skins. A perfectly adjusted hearth and smoke valve were vital for maintaining a dry climate. In winter dwellings, especially among subarctic peoples, the insulating layer could be very thick. Snow around the dwelling was often used as additional insulation. Snow, like dry grass, retains heat well and blocks the wind. Thus, indigenous peoples used the natural properties of materials, the impermeability of fat, the insulating qualities of grass, and smoke drying. All of this worked together to transform a seemingly primitive dwelling into a reliable and dry shelter. But even the most cunning trail is useless if your pursuers have water. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Apache turned the main source of life in the desert into a deadly weapon. Ready to learn more? The ability of indigenous peoples to use the properties of plants for protection from moisture and construction was remarkable. They did not simply collect plants, but understood their physical characteristics and knew how to adapt them. For peoples living in forested and humid regions, plants were the #1 building material. One important technique was to use certain types of grass and foliage as a barrier layer under clothing. In rainy weather, especially during sleep, they placed a thick layer of dry grass or fir branches under themselves. This created a layer that wicked away moisture and prevented the body from coming into contact with cold or wet ground. Thick, broad leaves or branches of coniferous trees were used for the roofs and walls of temporary shelters. Spruce branches, for example, are dense and cone-shaped, which allows rainwater to roll off them easily. By laying the branches in layers like tiles, they created an improvised but very effective roof. The peoples who lived on the coast actively used reeds and rushes. Thanks to their dense structure, these plants were ideal for weaving mats and rugs, which served as both walls and floors. Densely woven reed rugs were almost impervious to water and dried quickly in the sun. Sometimes tree resins and gums were used for water-repellent treatment. Pine or spruce resin could be used to seal the seams on boats, canoes, and on those areas of leather clothing that needed special protection. As the resin hardened, it created a solid, waterproof seam. Leaves shaped like funnels or special vessels made from bark were used to collect water. This allowed people to drink clean rainwater without coming into contact with dirty ground. They knew which plants had natural hydrophobic properties, i.e., the ability to repel water. The use of plant materials was the simplest and most accessible way to combat moisture. It was a method that did not require complex processing, but relied on the natural properties of flora. They took what they needed from nature without disturbing its balance. Want to know a secret that will change the industry? The main problem with wet leather is that it hardens after drying, making clothing stiff, brittle, and uncomfortable. Therefore, the Native American leather tanning process was aimed not only at durability, but also at maintaining softness regardless of weather conditions. They developed a unique, non-chemical method that yielded remarkable results. The key component of this process was animal brain matter. After removing the skin and all traces of meat and fat, the leather was repeatedly soaked in a mixture of warm fat and brains. Brains are rich in lecithin and other fatty substances that serve as natural emulsifiers. By soaking the skin in this emulsion, tanners saturated the fibers with fat, which prevented them from sticking together when wet. After soaking, the skin was repeatedly stretched and crumpled by hand to distribute the fat evenly throughout its thickness. It was a very laborious process, often lasting several days. The next stage was smoking, which we mentioned earlier, but it also played a role in tanning. The smoke not only dried the leather, but also fixed the fats inside the fibers. Smoked leather became more resistant to decay, and most importantly, retained its elasticity. The result was leather that could get wet in the rain, but remain just as soft and pliable after drying. This was a critical factor for moccasins and upper garments, which had to allow hunters to move freely. Stiffened leather could chafe, cause pain, and slow them down. Unlike European tanning methods using tannins, tree bark, this brain method was faster and produced a softer, lighter material. The leather became porous and breathable, but when properly impregnated with fat, it remained reliably protected from rain. It was the perfect compromise between protection and comfort. Retaining softness after rain was not just a matter of convenience, but a matter of survival. Soft leather was less damaged when bent, lasted longer, and retained heat better. This was a real technological breakthrough in the processing of natural materials. The ambush was effective, but how did the Apaches support themselves during long campaigns away from home? In the next chapter, we will talk about their unique logistics and survival system. The constant struggle with moisture required attention not only to materials, but also to the organization of the space around the dwelling. Native Americans had an intuitive understanding of hydrology and created simple but effective drainage systems. This was especially important for sedentary peoples such as the Iroquois, whose longhouses stood in one place for years. When choosing a place for a camp or settlement, they always chose elevated, well-drained area where water did not stagnate. This was the first and most important rule for avoiding waterlogging and dampness inside the dwelling. Places near streams or in low-lying areas were avoided. Shallow drainage ditches were often dug around the foundations of teepees and longhouses. These ditches diverted rainwater away from the walls of the dwelling, preventing it from accumulating and seeping under the foundation. This simple engineering solution significantly extended the life of the dwelling and kept it dry inside. For peoples who used semi-dugouts, such as the Mandan or Hidatsa, who lived on the Great Plains, drainage was even more complex. Earthen houses required special protection against water seeping through the walls and roof, so the top layer of earth was covered with a special clay or grass covering. This covering drained water away, like modern roof tiles. Inside the dwellings, where the floor was covered with a thick layer of grass and skins, cleanliness was always maintained. Regular replacement of the bedding was necessary to prevent moisture accumulation and decay. Keeping the floor dry was as important as having a dry roof. Particular attention was paid to the slope during construction. The roofs and walls of longhouses were built at a slight angle so that water would roll off easily. The sloping frame of the teepee also allowed water to run off quickly without lingering on the skins. These methods, based on common sense and observation of nature, ensured dryness and protection. They demonstrated that success in combating moisture often depends not on sophisticated technology, but on the proper organization of space. For indigenous peoples, combating moisture was often solved not only by technology, but also by strategic relocation. Many tribes, especially the nomadic hunters of the Great Plains, did not stay in one place throughout the year. Their migration was directly linked to seasonal changes and, accordingly, to precipitation levels. During the rainiest or wettest seasons, they tried to move to areas where the climate was drier or where there were better opportunities for drying. For example, in early spring, when the snow melted, they could move to higher, sunnier plateaus. This allowed their camps to dry out more quickly. The nomadic lifestyle of tribes such as the Comanche and Arapaho allowed them to avoid places that could become swampy after long rains. They always looked for well-ventilated areas where moisture did not linger. Movement was part of their adaptation to the climate. If they had to stay in one place for a long period, for example, for winter quarters, they carefully prepared the site. They built earthen embankments to protect the camp from spring floods and chose sites with loose, well-drained soil. Their planning always took the future into account. For peoples living near water, such as on the northwest coast where it rains almost year-round, migration was impossible. They compensated for this by building dwellings on stilts or on rocky, elevated areas. Their strategy was more static, based on constant adaptation to moisture. Thus, migration and seasonal planning were among the most reliable ways to combat moisture. They did not wait for rain to flood their camp, but left it following the bison and the sun. It was an active approach to climatic challenges. The ability to stay dry would be meaningless if there were no way to keep food, supplies, and most importantly, gunpowder and tinder for starting fires dry. To this end, Native Americans developed special waterproof containers and bags. Their creation was no less important than the sewing of outerwear. The main material for such containers was the same rawhide, untanned, thick leather, which was treated with fat and resin. It was used to sew sturdy bags in cases called parfleche. These envelope-shaped bags were very durable and, when properly treated, became almost waterproof. Rawhide, being very stiff, swelled when wet, which further sealed the seams. After drying, it shrunk again, retaining its shape. The inside of these bags could be additionally coated with fat or wax, creating an additional barrier to moisture. They were used to store dried meat, pemmican, and other products that needed to be kept dry. Small, tightly sealed leather pouches, sometimes made from animal bladders, were used to store tinder and flint, which were critical for making fire. It was an ideal natural container that was completely waterproof. Losing fire in wet weather meant facing starvation and hypothermia. In forested areas, birch bark boxes were used for storage. Birch bark has unique waterproof properties and could be sewn or glued with resin to make lightweight but sturdy containers. These boxes were used to store herbs, seeds, and other delicate items. Bags for guns and bows were also made of impregnated leather to protect weapons from rust and damage. Weapons were too valuable to be allowed to deteriorate in the rain. Thus, the entire storage system was built on the principle of maximum protection from moisture. What they don't want you to see are the amazing materials used for moisture protection by coastal peoples such as the Northwest tribes and the Eskimos, Inuit. They face moisture in a completely different, more severe form: seawater and freezing rain. For this purpose, they used materials that were not available to hunters on the plains: fish skin and the intestines of marine animals. Fish skin, especially salmon or cod, was incredibly durable and, when properly tanned, became very elastic. It was carefully cleaned, dried, and then sewn together using tendons. The result was clothing that was surprisingly light and completely waterproof. Such clothing was ideal for fishing and canoeing. Even more amazing was the material made from the intestines of marine mammals such as seals. The cleaned intestines were cut, stretched, and sewn together with a special stitch that was completely waterproof. The result was light, almost transparent parkas, outerwear, that were worn over regular fur clothing. Parkas made from intestines were ideal protection against moisture because they did not let water through and were very light. They protected fur clothing from getting wet, which was critically important in Arctic conditions, where wet fur quickly led to hypothermia. These parkas were a true masterpiece of applied engineering. The seams on such clothing were the most important part. They were sewn with a special bone needle and tendon thread, which swelled when wet, sealing the opening. Sometimes the seams were additionally coated with seal fat for complete waterproofing. These examples show that indigenous peoples have always found adequate responses to the challenges of their climate, using the resources available to them. Their methods of protection from moisture were local, effective, and ingenious in their simplicity. We see that the ability of Native Americans to stay dry for weeks was not the result of magic, but of a deep understanding of the laws of nature and the ingenious use of available materials. Whether it was fat-soaked bison leather clothing on the Great Plains or parka coats made from animal intestines on the Arctic coast, each method was perfectly adapted to the specific climate and lifestyle. They turned animal fat, bark, smoke, and even animal entrails into a reliable barrier against the elements. Their success lay in a comprehensive approach, protecting the body, protecting the home, and protecting supplies. These ancient methods are not just history, but a vivid lesson in how to survive and thrive by using the Earth's resources wisely and respectfully. It was true green survival technology that was ahead of its time. Which of these tactics for combating moisture, fat impregnation, bark raincoats, or fish skin clothing, do you find most ingenious? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the wisdom of indigenous peoples.